Okay, if we could come back together, friends, take a seat. As you may well imagine, we have a wide range of questions. Many of them are offering thoughts about similar themes. And so we're going to make an attempt to blend some of the questions, and I hope that what you have expressed gets articulated in our blending. Be patient with us. I'm going to pose the questions. Some of them are posed directly to one of our people, and some of them are posed more generally. So I wanted to start with this question, and I guess this really can go to you, Dr. Hrabowski, but if others would like to talk about this, it would be great. What is the impact of de facto segregation in our schools doing to today's children? And we're blending with another question about that. How might churches have an impact on addressing this? I'll let you go.
Sure. Yeah. There's a larger point when we think about de facto segregation. Some even use the term hyper-segregation, in that while we were moving towards more and more groups getting to know each other, starting after the 60s, we have moved back to a more divided society. And one of our challenges is that whether we're talking about Washington or throughout the country in every state, that people don't know each other. On my campus, when I get these students from different parts of the world, and they see our students who come from different parts of our state. There are some parts of my state where it's 99% white, other parts where it's 99% black. And then there are others where there's more mixing. And it's so interesting that the children who come from the completely segregated areas of both races have often been taught, be careful with those white folks, be careful with those black folks. They've been, on both sides, they've been told, you better not trust them, all right? And our challenge in the university, and Jim would know this, and Joan would know this, is to find ways of helping young people, because that's who we're working with, to know each other and to see the points of intersection, to understand what we have in common. It's possible to have differences and to think differently about things, but to learn how to listen. And if I were to say the one characteristic in our country, not just in South Carolina or Maryland, but in any state in this country, it is that we're not taking enough time to help people listen to the other point of view. Because even when you disagree completely with the person they're going to vote for or whatever, if you listen carefully enough, you'll find the things you have in common, and you can begin to understand how you can find the common ground. That is our challenge in religion and in education, to look for the common ground so that we can. Who doesn't care about children? We start there, okay?
Thank you. There's a follow-up to that, and you may address this, and some others may want to as well. The follow-up question is, how have you seen churches have an impact on this issue of de facto segregation?
You know, I see churches in my area, both of all races, and we know that churches for the most part are still very segregated. It's just a part of America right now. But the point is, we have seen examples of people who get to know each other across churches, number one. Number two, from my colleagues on campus who belong to churches, black and white. It is amazing to see how people were working to help during our Freddie Gray challenge a year ago. You know, it was a difficult period. It's still a difficult period. And yet my campus, by the way, is on 600 acres. It is not, it's next to the airport. So when people were calling saying, are your students okay during the Freddie Gray crisis, I could say the only destruction or corruption on my campus, or anything that's disrupting things rather, is construction. The place is peaceful. It's suburb. This is what happens in America. Downtown Baltimore, you could have all that going on, and on my campus, it's a pastoral setting. But my students said, we are Baltimore too. We are Baltimore also. And this is the key, that in terms of churches, a lot of these students came from their churches and their other groups. We had been working with that choice program that I mentioned between the choice program and the police. Before that happened, this is where we bring in this idea of people across sectors, with the educational people, with families, with police and with some elected officials. We had been having what we call these restorative circles, where you bring, for example, children and police together to talk about their view of what's going on. We had done that before Freddie Gray. And here's what was said, just an example. The kids said, we don't like it that when you stop us, you put us on the ground, make us lie down with our hands. They said, that's completely disrespecting us. And the kids said, why do you do us like that? And one of the police said, there are 5 of you here right now. If 4 of you are good kids and one kid has the crazy idea that he's going to take his gun, run behind me, and shoot me, my children won't have a daddy. He said, I'm scared. I'm just scared. Now, it was tense, and one of the other kids said, yeah, because that boy right there is crazy anyway. Everybody started laughing right there. The laughter helped. But it began that process of understanding the other's point of view. When Freddie Gray occurred, mothers and grandmothers knew some of the police in that community in Cherry Hill, Jim, and could say, take care of my child, help my child. And the police didn't see them as little thugs, but rather as children, all excited, you see. And just for the record, the breaking news media had those same 2 cars burning every day. Do you get that? The cars were gone. I mean, every day. And they had all these people downtown. The only people downtown were the media from everywhere else. And the police said, hey, everybody was too scared to go outside. During that entire period of the Freddie Gray situation, not one person was killed in a city where people are killed regularly. You get my point? So, but the churches were involved, black and white, in helping families during that period. Equally important, I've seen churches involved in education and in tutoring. And this is the one final point. Mothers, grandmothers, fathers need as much emphasis on the reading as the children, meaning that many Americans of all races don't read well themselves. And if they're going to help their children, they have to learn to read, because reading is at the heart of getting a job. Okay?
Yes, certainly. Yes, you may.
Thank you. If I could just add something particular for South Carolina and what we're facing here, and Joe, I think you would agree with this. Some of the issues that we're facing with segregation is giving opportunities to our students in very small school districts. And when you go back and look at some of our counties now, down in particularly rural areas, you look at how those districts were set up, and it was back in the 60s, and lines were drawn to create predominantly black districts. Maybe there's one district that might be a good mixture. And some of those districts have dwindled down to maybe 600 or 700 students, a county with 3 districts with only 600 students in each district. How are we going to offer opportunities for career development for those students at all of those high schools? I believe, and I like small settings. I grew up myself in a very small community, small high school. But in order today to give the opportunities that we need to give, particularly our middle and high school students, there's efficiency in scaling up in career centers. And so I would say over the next 10 years, I hope 5 years, and I sense in South Carolina, we used to have 180 school districts. We were down to 105, 90. We're down to 82. There's some room for some more consolidation, which really makes communities emotional and nervous. But for the best for the children, I think this is something we're going to have to address. And to me, the churches could be involved with understanding that, why it could be a good thing for the children in your community, and to work locally, politically, to see that a reality. So I think that we need to really address that issue to make some progress in South Carolina over the next few years.
The best educated generation, quite frankly, right now would be people who are either retired or are moving towards retirement, believe it or not. I mean, large numbers of people over 55 or 60, up through the mid-70s, who are well educated in churches and who want to make a difference and who can be very helpful. I am so supportive of teachers. I mean, when parents are pointing fingers at teachers, I always ask the question, well, what are you doing to help your child, right? And what I would say is that older people, and I'm I'm saying over 50, have had experiences of raising children, of having a job, and there's a kind of wisdom that they have. And I would argue that, assert that we really should be encouraging churches to get those people to help teachers, first of all, because many teachers are young and are overwhelmed sometimes. Because if the child hadn't been taught how to respect authority, that child is in with 30 people like that, 35. It's not the child's fault. The child just hadn't been taught. And so the idea of churches working with teachers and working to support bringing parents into the school so they can have less fear, and to help those parents learn what they can do to help their children to help the teacher. We've got to think that way, that the teacher is on the ground right there every day. And, you know, some parents can be so ugly in fighting students. And I always said, when's the last time your child got on your nerves? One child. And most people who've raised children, you know your children get on your nerves, especially when they're in teenage. Now imagine having 35 like that. You get my point? But people who are older from churches can help bring that wisdom to our communities.
Thank you. This is a question that really dovetails this issue, and I think that Molly and Dr. Hrabowski may both have things to say, as others of you might as well. Feel free to chime in. But this question is, I'm concerned about how education and educated people are categorized as elitist, regardless of background, and the lack of value that our youth seem to place on themselves and on their education. And also on the teaching, I'm blending a question here. Another question that fits into this category is a lack of respect for the teaching profession seems to be an inhibitor in our day, and people would like you to address that.
Just one comment, and others can address it. I mean, there's no doubt, I say to my colleagues, to my professors who write the books, that I need them to get out into the schools also, all right? I am always learning from fourth grade children, sitting on the floor with them doing math. I mean, it amazes me. And when we bring the children, knocking boundaries down between universities, you know, your program, Call Me Mister, to produce more black male teachers. We need for people to have relationships when they can see that people are just regular people. I'm always trying to say to my legislature, because they give me money, and to others, academics are regular people. I knew Jim would be a good president because he's a regular person. You get what I'm saying? If we get too stuffy at any level, people get turned off. We have to find ways. You're using standard English, but being, in a sense, with meeting them in the common ground. It's so important. Otherwise, it's us versus them, which is what we have to get away from. Others.
The question that was just asked was about, to rephrase it, why don't we value teachers more? And why don't we value education more? I think we have in South Carolina, and probably in many places around this country, a streak of anti-intellectualism that has been abiding in our communities for quite a long time. You know, where people look at folk who have advanced degrees or college degrees, and they say you're different. And we have done some things in the political realm to kind of reinforce that. And what I mean by that is that we have not, in our public policy, put resources in place that reflect the value that we say we have on education. You know, it doesn't take a lot to understand that when you talk the talk but don't walk the walk, people get the message. That is just words. What I want to say is I'm a recovering teacher, and and I feel what teachers feel because they're so unappreciated. And what I mean by unappreciated is that we don't pay them like the professionals that they are. We don't esteem them as the professionals that they are. As a matter of fact, they become political targets for us in the legislature when we talk about teachers' unions and the like. And so we make them targets and we devalue them politically, and as a result, we get what we get. I hope that helps.
So, I'd like to follow up on what you were speaking about. As a teacher, a current teacher, you spoke to all of the kinds of issues that teachers face. One of the things that I think also is a factor is that we have so many very, very young parents. And when we have young parents, I can't lose the opportunity to just say one thing about the brain. It does not fully mature until you're about 24, 25, that executive function piece. So we've got parents who do not have fully mature brains, parenting children, and as you might know, those of you who have children of your own, we're coaching our children all the time, and we're coaching them on the importance of education. And they may not get it, but because we get it and we're enforcing that in our homes, they are complying with our wishes. So if we have parents who don't get it, simply because they're not fully mature yet or because they haven't had the opportunity to gain that wisdom, they can benefit so much from all of us as mentors to them. Here's what I've learned, because I've been around the block a little bit, that education is going to give you choices. We say in our work that you may not take advantage of it, but if you don't have an education, you have no choice. You are stuck. And so we've got to help these young parents especially empower their children to take advantage of what education has to offer. And teachers need our help so desperately, because they can't do it all. And Molly, you know that you speak about this so much, that teachers can't do it all. This kind of cadre of collaborators can support teachers in that role and lift them up in their most important role.
Anybody else want to make a comment on the topic that's been raised here before we move to another question?
Just one thing that I think, as far as students valuing education, when you can make education relevant, it needs to be rigorous and relevant to the child. They will stay engaged. And without being respectful to my good friends in the university area, I think we are moving. For a long, long time, we have said that the only way to be successful was through a 4-year degree. I have caught myself even saying it years ago. It doesn't matter what degree you get, just get a degree and life's going to be good for you. And our career market has changed to the reality now that you can be very, very successful with a technical college degree, a 2-year degree, and I think there have been parents who have shunned, they've tried to make their children go away from what they really wanted to do. Maybe I wanted to be an auto mechanic, but mom and dad wanted me to go to college and get a degree. So we need to learn to find what the students' passion is, what they're interested in doing. And we always, yes, you have to have skills beyond high school. You have to continue be a lifelong learner. But letting the child find what they're interested in and what they're good at and what they want to do, and then as educators, we help them find that pathway. It may be through an apprenticeship program, through a technical school, 4-year college, whatever. But when students are engaged with what they like, they're going to stay in school, and it will become very, very important to them.
And we've already had a lot of good comments to this question. I know there are other questions, but I'll add 2 very simple things. And I can say this room because you know this. You can pray for our teachers. They have a really hard job. You can pray for them, and when you see them, you can thank them, because the world does need good teachers. And sometimes just say, I'm praying for you and I appreciate you, goes a long way.
You'll appreciate this. I work with different countries and have spent time in Japan and Germany and other places. The apprenticeship programs in Germany are done masterfully. We studied the chemistry skills of children who had determined that they would not be going to universities. They were going to be apprentices in companies, and their teachers would go with them several days a week to the company with the kids. Then we tested those children in the 11th grade compared to Americans who had 5s on the AP chemistry exam. The apprentice children did much better. They saw the hands-on experience. You know, I embarrass my wife when I tell this story, but her daddy built houses, and she was like his little boy and would go around with him building these houses. And when I got to college, we met at Hampton. She was the Virginia State champion in geometry. And it's because she had learned it through hands-on experiences. There's something to be said. And so I see programs around the country where they connect. Now, for Maryland, I'll tell you, being connected to the intelligence community and the military so heavily in the Baltimore, Washington corridor, large numbers of students come in with old-fashioned values. And believe it or not, places like the National Security Agency actually start working with children as young as 15. I have kids who come in as freshmen who already have security clearances. They're already working 15 to 20 hours a week at NSA. And they won't tell you. Then when they tell me, Doc, if I told you what I was working on, I'd have to kill you. They love telling me that. To which I respond, yeah, but I've been hearing that since before you were born, all right? But my point is, when for us in our area, the reason the legislature is so connected to public higher education and public education is that we see our state as a knowledge economy. All the national institutes of health, except one at Duke and Chapel Hill, are in Maryland. You see, the National Security Agency, the National Institute of Science and Technology, all the scientific infrastructure. So we are working to help children and teachers be involved, and we need more and more people encouraging children and teachers to get into hands-on work sooner, even if they're going to major in the humanities. This is not just about STEM. To understand marketing and sales. And then if you've not looked at jobs for the future, to go with what the superintendent was saying, it is a fact that there are large numbers of children who don't want to sit in a classroom and study the liberal arts immediately. Doesn't mean one day they might want to do it, but if the child has other interests, let the child do that first. Get a job, they can still come back. But if you Google jobs for the future, they really have looked at what states are doing to encourage this 2-year training as much as the 4-year training.
I'd like to add a word from the church on this one. We have worked hard to get mentors and tutors into early childhood programs. And I think that one of the strengths that we bring is that we have a faith, those of us who are Christians have in our faith a recognition that we have many gifts, one body. We have practice in discernment, let me put it that way. And when we can go in and form relationships with children and hear the stories that they have to tell about their life along the way, a whole new kind of discernment begins to emerge about what to read, which tutors to have. And the other thing I just need to say about the relationships that form in there is that when we as persons of faith become tutors and mentors and form relationships with children, come to know the conditions under which they have been raised and live and struggle with, that the kind of conversation we have with our legislators is completely changed, because now it becomes a conversation based on a relationship and a completely different kind of conversation that begins to change votes.
I just can't. I gotta brag just a little bit.
Would you
Thank
give her a
Doc.
hand for her passion? No, give her a hand for her passion. I love it. I love it.
Well, South Carolina, we don't get a lot of things to brag on in education, so I want to tell you 2 or 3 things. Number one, we are a leader in the nation now in youth apprenticeship programs. The Secretary of Labor came down a year ago to see what we were doing. We've expanded. Last year it was over 400%, almost 800%, but we have young people working in school. They go in on a little part-time job. I was just out last week. We started a new program for young men and women who are interested in diesel mechanics. They're working at our bus shops. It's a program nobody else in the country has done. They go and work a few hours a week during the summer. They're learning to work with their hands, to be ready to have a great career when they go through technical college. So I'm really excited. We're working very closely with our Department of Commerce. We have a person there who is in charge of apprenticeship programs. It's called Apprenticeship South Carolina. If any of you are business folks, you don't have to be a Boeing or a Michelin to receive an apprentice. We go to mom and pops. If you run an electrician company or a veterinarian or whatever, and you could have room for a young person to come and work at your business, we're ready to work with you to set up a program. So
That's very good.
thank you for mentioning that.
Very nice.
To follow up, there are a couple of questions asking about the legislature's response to the Abbeville lawsuit. A couple of people want to know what's happening there, but this is the question that I would like to pose to you, Representative Neal, and others if you'd like to weigh in. How can concerned citizens encourage a full and generous response for the legislature? What do you need from your people?
That's a good question. What we have done in the legislature in response to the Abbeville lawsuit is to create what's being called a framework. And this framework is supposed to direct our efforts moving forward to remediate the impact of poverty and lack of funding in those districts. Our frustration, I should say my frustration, is that we have not moved to a point where we're willing to put resources in the amounts that are necessary to really make change happen. I'm hopeful that what we have done is a good start, but I believe that when you want to see real change, you put resources where they're needed. I think there have been a lot of good planning that's been done, a lot of good analysis that's been done. The challenge come January will be to take that and actually put funding in place that will enable change to happen in these districts that we are hoping and needing to see. What you can do, you can talk to your legislators, particularly in the Senate, about the Abbeville lawsuit and what needs to happen. There are going to be a lot of competing issues for funding in January. You probably heard that the governor has asked agencies to plan for a 3% budget cut. And that may be a signal that the economy may not do as well as we want it to do. If that is the case, we've got some competing interests. We have to come up with monies to work on our roads in this state. A massive need there, about $21 billion. We have an $18 billion shortfall in our state pension fund that we're going to have to figure out how to close that. Now we have Abbeville, and we've got to figure out how to get those resources into schools in those districts that need to be there. What you can do is talk to your legislator, encourage them to put education at the top of that list, and that we don't allow it to simply sink to a lower priority and be forgotten.
So you got some marching orders there. This is a question to you, Dr. Hrabowski, and it's a combination. Several people have asked about this. How can we influence a grit attitude in preschool and elementary school children to prepare them for difficult studies?
Let me give you an interesting phenomenon in humankind. If you go into kindergarten or first few years of elementary school and you're talking to kids and you ask a question, me, everybody, there's a kind of bubbly, right? Whether they are not paying attention to what, but me. By the time you get to middle school, they're a little more cool. You get to high school, they're a little cynical. And you get to college and it's over. All right, it's really challenging. And I've told teachers somehow they have a way of reflecting that same mindset. If I talk to elementary teachers, they are, right? Middle school teachers, a little more cool, a little more, and then high school teachers, getting a little tough to get that audience. And university professors, the typical look is this. You can't look too happy if you're a university professor because you're not intellectual enough. Now, what am I saying? I am saying that in the elementary years, when we're from birth all the way to those first few years, when children are still with the right attitude, really the attitude we want, when they're excited, right, and they can do anything, we have the opportunity to shape their thinking on two levels. Number one, to make sure we let them know just how gifted every child is. We have a way of teaching children by the time they're in the third grade. There's a smart group and there's a group that's not smart. They get those messages in so many ways. So to be able to say our mindset that every child has strengths in different areas and we want to build those strengths, but then to give them exercises that will, self-control is one of those words, when we talk about the neuroscience of it all. This idea, if you look at the work of people like psychiatrist Jim Comer and Barbara Bowman, who are on my White House Commission, who look at birth through about 3rd grade, they're saying we have to help teachers understand the whole child. It's not just the reading and the math. It is the psychological, the emotional. And what's interesting about that, from my perspective, is the more the teacher gets the support to understand how to impact that entire child, the whole child, the more we can shape their values, but also their habits. Time on task. We're challenged with our little 5-year-old grandson right now, working hard because he is not one to be time on task. And my wife, who has a background in early childhood, is really using everything she has to try to help his mother understand we've got to keep this boy with time on task because he wants to do all that. So it's knowing that the idea of the psychological side and using different strategies, quite frankly, for incentives when they do the right thing, and not to beat them when they don't, but rather to have other approaches to showing them that if you're going to act any kind of way, you're not going to get all the happy stuff you want. That would be what I would say.
Did you want to speak? Tammy, come on. Come on. Yep, come on. Yep. Come do.
And we have to acknowledge that failure is part of it. That when you fail, that's when you learn. And you know, y'all caught a lot of flack when you changed the grading scale. Friends, we need to not grade especially our youngest students, because when we use punitive grading, we're grading kids on the maturity of their frontal lobe, and we are shutting them down. They've got to have hope. They have to feel empowered that I can get better, that I can learn, as opposed to just shutting down. Yeah, we've got to look at that whole child, and especially to lift them up. So just a word on that.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions on the importance of early childhood, and many of the comments that have been made addressing other questions have gotten at some of this, but I do want to, because we have a stack of people who've asked about early childhood, I'm going to pull one from a retired early childhood educator who asks this question, and feel free to fan it out if you want to respond to it. If earlier childhood is so important, why is funding for it such a challenge?
I know the broad answer nationally is that people have not been educated to understand the significance. They think it's warm and fuzzy. They don't understand the neuroscience involved in thinking skills of babies, in learning how to teach mothers to read to their children, in nutrition, you know, the toxic impact of poverty and stress on a child. If a child sees horrible things, it has an impact on the capacity to learn. And it doesn't mean we can't intervene, but we have to have the funding to help teachers know what you do when a child has been through hell. You know, there are things that can be done, but you have to understand that background and what happens if you've seen somebody killed or if you've seen somebody on drugs and, you know, all of those things. And just quick story, in the 60s, there was no National Institute of Women's Health in America. And because the scientists said studying women's health was not a serious subgroup. You should just study human health, they said. And yet all the studies that were done were on men. All right? Now, Mrs. Sergeant Shriver, Eunice Shriver, took 2 little girls into President Kennedy's or her brother's office. One child, the older child, had serious psychological challenges and could not focus. The younger child was perfectly connected to the president. And she said, you see the difference? He said, of course, this one is born this way. She said, no, it's not that. It's not that. It is that we finally learned what needed to happen to the mother during pregnancy to prevent the second child from having the problems that this first girl will have for the rest of her life. John Kennedy got on the phone, called the head of NIH, and said, create the blankety blank National Institute of Women's Health. Give Eunice Shriver a hand for fighting for women in this country. Give her a hand for that. Now, and I say that simply to say, when we don't know things and we just assume that, oh, it's what's important is the college level or whatever, when we have not been educated and then educated public policy people to understand it, they don't put the emphasis on it. So this is why what Bishop Waller was saying is so important. The more we have these experiences and can talk to legislators about the difference, the more we can begin to educate people. We're saying at NIH now that we must, in our country, get everybody thinking about those first years because they shape the rest of the child's life. It's very important.
We have a couple of questions about supporting teachers and teacher retention, and I know many of you are aware of the statistic that our teachers are retiring at a much faster level than we are producing teachers. So I also know we've got some deans of education in the room, and if you all want to weigh in on this, it would be great. But the question, combined from several thoughts, is what programs and support are available for young teachers? How do we recruit people to teach in the hardest, the most challenging areas of our state? And how do we retain teachers past the 1 or 2 year mark? So I'll throw that to any educator. Molly, if you want to, anybody that wants to weigh in on that, it would be great. I'll bring the mic to you if you are sitting in another part of the room. Go ahead.
I don't mind starting it off. It's a real challenge with competing occupation and professions that young people today have to go in that, as Representative Neal mentioned, pay a lot more. What we're doing in South Carolina now, the legislature did appropriate some additional funding, $3 million, I believe it is, that went to SARA, the Center for Educator Recruitment and Retention, which is housed at Winthrop, to come up with plans and ideas. For a number of years in South Carolina, we have had a loan forgiveness program where students who will agree to go into a critical geographic area and teach, or into a subject area that's of high need, like math, science. Now almost everything's critical need, but we would, for every year you teach, you would have some of your loan paid off. That has been enhanced now, and we are re-upping that program to make sure that the plaintiff district areas are covered. So if you go and teach there, your loans will be paid off. There's money also to help the teachers who are there, the veteran teachers who live in those communities now, if they want to get their master's degree or additional study, that there's money that will be given as incentives to them. The legislature did appropriate a small amount of money to the plaintiff districts to add that they can use in any way they want for teacher bonuses, for incentives, for signing bonuses, or however, no strings attached on how those local districts want to use those funds for recruiting and retaining teachers. I have always said, and the research shows that the number one thing for that teachers, the reason they leave is that they don't feel that they're supportive. And I think that is the job of the principal. And we talk a lot about that, building the a good pool of high quality principals, because nobody wants to work for a bad boss. If you don't have a good boss who supports you, you're going to leave. So we put a lot of emphasis on teachers in the state, but we haven't put enough on principals and that leadership development that they need to know how to go into a classroom and understand instruction and really support the teachers. So you'll see a lot of leadership development going on to build that pool. But those are just some of the things that are happening in the state. Joan, I know you may have other ideas. And I will say I've shared with the deans and asked them, and I think Jim had to step out. No, there he is. I've talked with the folks at Clemson University, College of Charleston, all of the deans to say, if we're going to get young people to go into these rural areas or Title I schools to work, during their time at the university, they need to spend some time. They need to be required to spend some time in a Title I school. And better yet, go out somewhere in South Carolina that they've never been before, because they may just fall in love with Clarington, with Somerton, or Saluda, or wherever. They may get there and really love the place and see that this is how they want to devote their life. So some of the universities have already responded, and they're taking and requiring their teaching fellows or their teacher candidates to go and spend time in Title I schools, or get them out, whether it's summer camp, whatever they're doing, out into the rural areas so they can experience how wonderful those children are.
Thank you, Miley. I want to add a couple things. My wife was a Title I teacher in Baltimore City many, many years ago. I wish she was here. She could add greatly to the discussion. Before I make my comments, mine will be more on the recruiting side than the retention side, but I was doing a little bit of math. There are 7.3 billion or so people in the world. We have one of the top 100 most influential leaders in the world here with us today, and we're very, very fortunate. I have to put that out there. So, Freeman, every time I'm with you, I said I listen because I know there's something that I can learn. And it made me think to what my mother said. She said, Jim, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them in that proportion. So every time I'm with you, I'm trying to listen and learn. And when I first started at Clemson in 2013, one of the questions I asked, and I was asking a lot of questions, I said, what can we do to have a greater impact? What can we do to make a bigger difference? And 2 programs quickly popped up on my radar screen, and people told me about something called the Corridor of Shame. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And then they told me about the Corridor of Shame, and it was that we could have a greater impact. So one of the programs that we've worked really hard on is called the Emerging Scholars Program. If you don't know about Emerging Scholars, it's a great program. We go into the Corridor of Shame and take your hard-working students in high school that are B level, not your A, they just need some support. They need some love. They need a relationship. We get them to visit colleges. They end up having a 100% graduation rate from high school, go on to college and succeed at a great level. We're trying to raise a lot of money and to get teachers to go into those areas to teach. The other, and Freeman, I appreciate very much that you mentioned this, is the Call Me Mr. program. Now, Call Me Mr. is a nationally recognized program started at Clemson to get more African American males teaching in elementary schools across this state, but it's spread to other states. It's really important that we recruit a very diverse group that's willing to go wherever they need to go to create a relationship and to make a difference. The retention piece is tough. It's really, really tough, and I know, Molly, you work hard on that. Being a teacher is a tough job. Again, we got to pray for them, we got to thank them, and we got to give them all the support we can, but we need the next pipeline of educators coming. Yes, sir.
You know, I sit and listen to all this today, and
Would you introduce yourself to us, please,
my
sir?
name is Ronald Friday. I'm just a normal individual. Some of you, I am. Mr. Hrabowski, thank you a lot. You know, we talk about, the question was centered around retention of teachers in rural schools and small schools. Now I'm going to tell you who I am. I spent my life in the military, straight out of high school. I got 2 masters and I got a bachelor's. Let me tell you how I got my bachelor's first. The University of Maryland has a program at every military installation that you can enroll in. If Clemson, Francis Marion, Charleston, University of South Carolina, you need to take, I think, it would take the educator to the school. And when the teacher is there, they got a bachelor's degree program, offer a master's program right there on that campus. Guess what happened? They will never leave because they can get the additional education and then they can move on. They will fall in love with it. Just like I went from Fort Sill, Oklahoma to Germany. I started with Central Texas College, got my associate's degree. Then I transferred to University of Maryland. Even though I came to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I was able to continue my education through the distance learning program. So in South Carolina, you got Webster. Use that a good example. Webster followed the military around. Webster University has followed us all around. So what happens is, where you at in the military, you can stay with Webster. But in South Carolina school system, in the education piece, just think about it. If University of South Carolina had a master's program in Tillmansville, they will come to Tillmansville High School where the faculty is at, teaching. Guess what we'll have? You'll have them getting that program. Same with any institution. I just use that school. But just think about that piece.
Thank you. That is such a great thought, and we really do appreciate it very much. And your own experience, of course, is very important for us to hear. We are now at the time when I need to call on Skip Adams, Bishop Adams, to come forward. He is new to South Carolina, just became the bishop of the Episcopal Church in South Carolina last month, and he's bringing fresh eyes and ears, and he's going to tell us what he has heard and observed through our conversation thus far.
Thank you, Susan. I have been in South Carolina all of 47 days. So, yeah, so I venture into this with some measure of trepidation. However, lots of connections. I am also from originally the Upper South, in that I grew up in Baltimore, or as we say there, Balmer, and had a great educational experience there. Well, I think the first observation I would like to make is don't take what has happened here today for granted. Having been here only 47 days, to be able to be a part of a conversation like this and see your faces and people who care about education and what education can be for our young people, and to be privileged to be a part of a conversation like this, I'm hoping that what we come out of today with, among other things, is a grateful heart. I'm guessing that there's not a single person in this room who is here, who is not here because of an education that you have received. And I became aware as I sat here today that it's been a long time since I've thanked God for my education and the people who provided it for me. And so what I'm hoping is that you find something in your own heart today, that you walk out of here deeply grateful for the people who provided you that education, and that because you have been gifted, that your resolve to return the gift is even greater than when you walked in here this morning. So please don't take your education for granted, and also for those folks who have not who have been able to provide that for you. I am a person who I was the first person in my family to go to college. However, my parents valued education, and I'm one of those folks who had the benefit of two committed parents. And we know the kind of way that can empower people. Nevertheless, even for folks who may have a single parent who are doing amazing things for them, or folks who have lost their parents, we do know that there are other ways to develop relationships that can't substitute for that completely, but that can develop those webs of relationships. Just to say, speaking of motivation, my father never went to college, but he wrote a trigonometry book for Bethlehem Steel because he was empowered by some folks to continue to learn, even though he did not have that opportunity himself. A lot of us have talked about mothers today. I got to talk about mother. Mom taught me very early on, when I was very young. She said this: do not pray for anything for which you are not willing to be a part of the answer. And so what I'd like to say is that in our churches, a couple of things. Have education and the issues around which we are talking today be a part of the regular prayers of your congregations. If you're not doing it, please do that. And all of our different traditions have ways of doing that, starting with gratefulness and also holding up our teachers, educational systems, the dreams that God's people have. Another thing that occurred to me today as I was listening to all of you, it has to do with the contradistinction of fear and love. I really believe that the antidote to fear is love. And we all know that we are living in a culture right now that is trying to play off of people's fears in all kinds of different ways. Fear is not the gift that the church has to give to God's people. The gift that we have to give is love. And love is justice in action. And this is an issue, this educational resolve that we're talking about today is about justice. It's about basic human rights. Education is not a luxury. The whole public school system in the United States was developed in order to have an educated populace, in order to have a healthy democracy. That's where the roots are. And so we need to be educated in order to have a healthy country. And education is not a luxury, and I don't hear anybody saying that here today, but education is a basic human right, and it needs to be good education. And one of the things I think the churches can do is not only pray, but then be willing to be a part of the answer, as good old mom said, and create opportunities for developing the webs of relationships that churches tend to be really good at. And if I may challenge all the clergy who are in the room and others who are not here by extension, if your local school doesn't know who you are, you have missed a huge opportunity. And I would ask my bishop colleagues here to encourage your clergy to have them be a part of the local educational communities, whatever they may be, have a presence there. Even one of the things was one of the richest experiences of my life as a parish priest before I was bishop, is that even when my kids got older and were off doing other things, I continued to go to the elementary school and read to the kids every Friday. I remember those times with great affection. If I went on, I'd probably start to cry. It was just so powerful for me. But what I heard back from the kids and the teachers is what a great gift that was as well. One other thing I want to say, I have lots of things running around in my head right now, and that is around those issues of fear and love. One of the things we learn from science, I love the connections with neuroscience and very important fields of study especially around learning and how we learn. One of the things that we learn from science, from good old Charles Darwin, yes, Origin of Species, Charles Darwin, is that he taught us, as have others, that the most diverse communities in the ecosystem are the most healthy. And that's not just true for the ecosystem, that's just true in human relationships. Because I think that's how God created the world. And that God created a world that where it's most diverse, it's most healthy. And so anything that we can do, here we are here with educators and legislators and people of faith all in this place. This is a minor miracle that we're all in the same place together. And if we don't grab a moment here because of what we have heard today and inspired today to go out and be a grateful people, continue to do the work that we've been called to do in order to be the answer, at least a part of the answer to Jesus' great prayer, "Thy kingdom come," this can be the seed for an ongoing movement of Thy kingdom come. So that's what I've seen today, and thank you for the opportunity to weigh in for this brand new South Carolinian who dares to enter this space. So thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. Bishop Holston, we're to you now.
Well, I'm nestled between a wonderful presentation and lunch. And I've been given 10 minutes to say what I need to say, which is a call to action. And I'm trying to think which one is going to run me over first. You getting to lunch or the 10 minutes that I'm going to have before me. Let me say, first of all, thank you to Dr. Hrabowski for being with us today. When I first heard that you were coming here, I wanted to do a little research to find out a little bit about you, because first of all, your name kind of threw me off when I saw your face and picture. And then when I found out you were from Birmingham, Alabama, raised in that area, that really threw me for a loop. But to hear you explain it on your 60 Minutes piece about being the name after a Polish slave owner, and that freeman really came from being the third generation of being a free man. It made me very, very happy to be a part of this discussion with you today. And I'm grateful for all of my colleagues and who are bishops who are here as well. And for those of you who are here, I'm hoping that you'll look around and see who is not here, and then decide how we will make that information that we have learned today and we have received today available to those of us who are in our circle of influence. In talking to Dr. Hrabowski, he asked me specifically what school did I attend, and I told him what school of higher education that I matriculated at in the city of Athens, Georgia. Which I will go unnamed here today. He said to me something peculiar when he says, "Oh, you were from one of those higher group, I remember." And I do remember that. My parents were graduates of HBCUs. But in my city of Athens, we had two people by the name of, one by the name of Hamilton Holmes and one by the name of Charlene Hunter Galt, who integrated that school of higher education. And my parents were teachers, and they had a pact in my community that the firstborn of their children would be admitted to that university in that city. So that's how I got there. Now, my brother was one of those kids that you had to nestle a little bit, so he went back to the HBCU, but that was all right. But what it taught me was that community was important. So when I think about this call to action, I'm reminded about Matthew, and it's not a hurricane, but it's Matthew, which says these words in chapter 19, verse 14. "Let the children come to me, and do not stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." The late Nelson Mandela said it this way: "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way it treats its children." So my friends, the bishops of South Carolina, and those of you by your mere presence, recognize that education for all of our children is a priority. And as people of faith, we believe that giving our children a chance to better their lives through education is an investment not just in their future, but in our future as well. By our mere presence today, we recognize that what is important to us, we will make happen in our state. What is not important to us, we will make excuses. And poverty and the lack of education and the lack of the public policy to make education for all happen is a part of the excuses that we have to live with. The statement that we all are struggling in South Carolina to get off the bottom of every list that matters should sting all of us. So what I want to say to you today is that there's a difference between compliance and commitment. Compliance is only doing what you can do. Commitment is doing whatever it takes. Dr. Hrabowski has said that we need more grit and that we need the willingness to do whatever it takes to succeed. And by your presence here today, you are saying that we want to be a part of a community that will make that happen. It was also said that we cannot do this by ourselves because we've let a generation go by. So in this very room, the holy has met the hurting. And there is something we all can and must do. My friends, we could talk about strategy all we want, but strategy without implementation is failure. And so you have been asked to be in this place, to be people of implementation who will go back to the communities and the places in which we work and serve and live and make a difference. Now, it is my understanding that there are two questions that we're going to have to ask. Would it not be a classroom if we did not give some homework for you to do? So there will be postcards, I believe, that will be provided for you. They're on your tables. And you're being asked to say what you're going to do, not what someone else is going to do. What you're going to do to be helpful to support teachers, what you're going to be helpful to do to support our children in the community, what are you going to help to do to be advocates for public policy, what are you going to do in your community to make a difference, whether you're going to go into a school and read, or whether you're going to go onto the State House steps and make a difference. Whatever you want to do, you've got to answer these two questions. What has to happen in South Carolina for us to replicate the successes of UMBC? And then the second question, what are you willing to do to make this happen? We're going to give you an opportunity to do that. We've been talking about mothers here, and Bishop Adams said what his mother said, which kind of stung me. Do not pray for something that you're not willing to be a part of the answer. Now, we're asking you to be a part of this answer. Now, this is what's going to happen. You're going to take those postcards. You're going to answer these two questions as best as you are able to do. And then you're going to give them to us. We're going to channel all that information and have and provide, and then we're going to mail that card right back to you so that you will be reminded of what you said you would do to make a difference. My friends, my mom said it to me this way: good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good becomes better and your better is best. The question is what are you willing to do? The community is our schools of higher education, our schools and our communities, our teachers, our churches, the people on our blocks, the people in our barber shops and in our beauty shops, the people at the grocery stores, the people in the restaurants. All those folks in our community have a willingness and have the ability, just like you, to make a difference. How will you help them connect? Now, we're going to give you a few minutes to do that. And
Be sure you address it to yourself.
And address the envelope to yourself, because we can't mail it to you if you don't address it.
So be sure.
So address it to yourself. And what else, Susan, do we need? And I want to thank you for your presence here. And I invite my colleague, Bishop Waldo, to come and have words.
Thank you so very much. May I say one thing? I want to thank Bishop Holston for his challenge to us, and to say we really do want you to address these to yourselves so that we can mail them back to you after we've taken stock of what you've said. We will generate a report from it, and I will be standing at the lunch line to get your postcard. It's your ticket to lunch, okay?
I'm going to, I should say, I come to the microphone right now with a lot of the gratitude that Bishop Adams was talking about. I'm grateful for all of you, for all of our speakers. This has really been a wonderful day. I also have a couple of other notes of gratitude that I want to express. One is to the Sisters of Charity Foundation, which paid for some of the costs of this dialogue. And then also to Spirit Communications. Is Bob Keene in the room? Can you Spirit Communications funded this lunch, helped support this luncheon, and we are really grateful for your support. If we can get more corporations involved in some of this work too, there's no telling what we'll do. There's some unsung heroes in this room, and I want to name the ecumenical officers of the various dioceses. I want all of you to step forward. I know there's Missy Walker over here. Where's Sandy McDonald? Sandy, where'd you go? Over here. And Kathy James, where did you go? Here we go. And there's a couple of them missing, but thank you for your work. And we got one more. Oh, there we go. Mary, over here. And Furman, I didn't see you. Good. And we also have several judicatory communicators here. Carrie Graves, and where are our other communicators? I know that the Roman Catholic one is here. These folks have been doing more work than you can imagine to make this happen. But the one who's done the most of all is Susan Heath. And we are so grateful to Susan for this. Susan is unusual. Susan is unusual in that she has been hired by 4 different judicatories who have made it, I don't know that there's any such thing anywhere where 4 different judicatories have come together to fund a position so that this can happen. This is really wonderful. So, Susan, thank you. Finally, instructions. That door in the corner, the one, not the far left, but the one just behind Bob Keene, is the door we will go through to get lunch. There's a line in there. You pick up your lunch and come in here, and there will be plates in there. And during lunch, Dr. Hrabowski will be over by the Cathedral bookstore signing books. There are copies of his book available there that you can buy by cash, check, or credit card in the Cathedral. In the bookstore. Go into the bookstore to get your book, and then right outside the bookstore to get it signed. And I believe the only thing left now is to bless the food. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Once again, Lord, we thank you for the blessings of this day. We thank you for calling us into your service. We thank you for welcoming the children. And we pray for the strength, the courage, the commitment, and the passion to go out into the world that you have made to bring life where there has been struggle. Bless the food that we share, bless the conversations and the energy around our tables, and then send us out this day to do your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Thank you all.